Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. I hope that you are all doing well. This is where I talk about the books that I'm reading. I like to read diverse books and I highlight a lot of Canadian literature. If you are new, thank you so much for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the books that I've read from February to May. I'm still doing some catch up, so this isn't everything, but it's very, very close. Normally I would share my stats from Storygraph, but because my reading was also significantly lower for the past few months with moving and getting settled, I'm still working on that. So there's not a whole lot to share. One of the months I think I read one book, so but from the last haul that I posted, the TBR stack is currently at 1,530, pretty high. So in March, I was mostly focused on Canada Reads, and I had to haul all 5 of the shortlisted books. So I hauled Watch Out for Her by Samantha Bailey. I hauled A Two-Spirit Journey by Ma-Nee Chacaby. I hauled the other memoir that was on the list, Jennie's Boy, A Newfoundland Childhood by Winn Johnston. I also hauled Dandelion by Jamie Liew. And then the 5th one on the list, I hauled Etta and Otto and Russell and James by Emma Hooper. So I had to haul all 5 of these to read them. I'm not going to talk about them here, but I will put a link to the video where I do talk about I talk about Canada Reads, I talk about the short list, and I talk about each one of the books, and then I also predicted the book that I thought, or at least hoped, would win. So the only book that I did count in a haul was Watch Out for Her. So since I have hauled it and I've read it, I'm going to take it off of the TBR stack, which means that it is now at 1,529. So the other books, I never actually counted them in any of the hauls, even though I did read them, but they kind of cancels each other out. Okay, so besides these 5 books, I did read others, and I'm going to share them from least enjoyed to most enjoyed. And first up, this was a real disappointment for me. I was really hoping to enjoy this book, and it's not very often that I rate a book 1 star, but coming in at 1 star is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. I don't have the book to show you. I'll put a picture up because, as you know, I was moving at the end of February, and it takes a lot to move all of my books, and I didn't want to waste any space for this book to actually come with me, so it very quickly got donated. So the picture's hopefully up, and I know people love this book. I am not one of those people. I did not love this at all. This was one of the most painful books I've ever read. If the premise of Lincoln grieving for his son was the main part of this book, and it actually told that story, I would have been all in. And I'm even good with a ghost story, and having the ghosts talk to each other, I was fine with that. But I wasn't okay with 160 plus characters, of which I didn't care about like 158 of them. So in the story, if you can call it a story, we're in the Bardo, right, which is like a purgatory of sorts between life and death, with ghosts in this cemetery. They don't seem to know that they're dead, and they avoid using words like coffin or death or anything that would make them have to really acknowledge what had happened to them and where they are. Which I did like that part. So they are the narrators of Lincoln's grief for his son that dies. But they also are narrators of everything else, much of which didn't always make sense to me. It was all over the place, and I didn't care about it. So if you like books that have different structures and aren't really written in novel format, which I sometimes have liked that, but maybe this is for you. Maybe that's the thing that I just didn't get. I'm certainly not against those things, but for me the execution just didn't work. And yeah, this is going down as one of the worst books I've ever read. So the good news is that it brings the TBR stack down to 1,528. So the next books range from 3 to 4 stars. First up is a debut novel called Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson, which I believe I rated a 3.5 or a 3.75 star. I read this in February for Black History Month, and I ended up really enjoying it more than I thought I would. I'm not sure what I expected, but this was better than whatever it was I did expect, if that makes sense. It may have also helped that this is a story about a mother who dies and what she leaves her children. And having, just lost my own mother, I may have connected to this in a way that perhaps I wouldn't have if I had read it at a different time. So there was just this interesting connection to this. So the premise of the book is that Eleanor Bennett has died, and her lawyer gets in touch with her 2 children, Benny and Byron. And they have been estranged from each other for some time, and they're basically each living their own lives, doing their own thing, but now their mother has, brought them together through her death. And she leaves a recording and a black cake as their inheritance. And they are supposed to share this black cake when the time is right. And the black cake is an important family recipe, really with its own history and its own story. And the recording that she leaves behind lets her children in on what her life was truly like. So there was a lot that I really liked about this book. I thought the characters were very well developed and very well written. I liked how culture was brought into the story, and the mother's story is very interesting. So it's interesting how that story is told within the story, if that makes sense. And it's just an interesting way to show that we don't always know the people that we think we do. And I would say especially as the parent-child relationship. And, they thought they knew their mother, but they really didn't. So the siblings learn about themselves while also learning about their mother. And I just think it's very well done. So the reason that this didn't get 5 stars for me was because it really bounced around quite a bit. So sometimes it took me a while to kind of figure out where we were and who the characters were at the time. There seemed to be a lot of characters. I don't know if they were all needed, but sometimes this just that took me out of the story for a bit. So I think for a debut, this is excellent, and I will definitely read more from this author if they publish more. So definitely worth a read, I think. Okay, so the next book actually stays with some similar themes, and it's Becoming a Matriarch by Helen Knott. I gave this 4 stars. This book was longlisted for Canada Reads this year, and it is by an author that I have been really wanting to read. So Helen Knott is an Indigenous author, and she lives in my hometown of Fort St. John, BC. And Becoming a Matriarch is actually her second memoir. It shares the story of her grandmother and her mother. So they die about 6 months apart from each other. And this makes Helen take a look at her relationships with each of them. And she really looks at her role and what her role is now, that she is basically the matriarch. So again, I think that I read this book at a good time in my life because, my mom died a year ago and other matriarchs within my family have also died. And it does make you think of how things shift, and it and helps you kind of reconsider who you are and what that means now. And I really liked how this book was written. The prose are quite lovely. I also liked how she structured the book and told the stories. It's also a beautiful, I would say, beautiful reflection on women and the importance of women and female relationships. I do highly recommend this one. So with these two books, it brings the TBR to 1,526. Okay, moving on to my highest rated books. I really wanted to read Helen Knott's first memoir. So I read In My Own Moccasins by Helen Knott, which I gave this, I think, 4.5 stars. And since I read this after reading Helen Knott's other memoir, so I kind of read them out of order, I already knew some of the players or the characters involved. But this memoir definitely gave me more of Helen's story and background. So the first part of the book, Helen is sharing her experiences of trauma. And then in the second part, she shares her healing. So I would say that this is really a story of the importance of truth and reconciliation, and how reclaiming one's culture and traditional practices plays such a vital role for people individually, but also as a community. So this is done very well in this book. And some of this book is really hard to read. Helen talks about residential schools, intergenerational trauma, racism, abuse, alcoholism, and just a lot of really hard things. She makes herself very vulnerable in the telling of her story and how colonialism has affected her and her family and her community. So the resilience piece, because it does talk about this being a resilience memoir, is incredible. Like how she overcomes so much and how she has not only made a change in her own life, but how she is making a change for others, I think is really important. So this is another example, I think, of an individual's story that is so much more than that. And this book, as well as her other memoir, I think belong in the canon for reading and learning about Indigenous peoples in Canada. And also, reading the book, I think, is an act of working towards truth and reconciliation. So I liked how she structured her other book more, but her writing here is excellent. And as I said, she is in, some ways more vulnerable in this one. Okay, so the next book that I also gave 4.5 stars is In Memoriam by Alice Winn. This is a debut historical fiction novel that takes place in and around World War I. So at one time I used to read and devour war stories, and I've kind of gotten away from that in the last decade or so, with a few exceptions. So this was one of those exceptions. And this book is so much more than a book about war. First of all, the writing is beautiful. It begins at an English boarding school where we meet the two main characters, Henry and Sydney. They are very different in many ways. They're almost polar opposites, but they both love each other and they can't tell each other that. And how Alice Winn writes about their relationship is also beautiful. You can really feel the confusion and the tension and the desire for them to be together. And especially since they both, end up going to war under very different circumstances, and they don't know if they will survive, right? But the love that they have for each other doesn't just go away. This isn't like some boy crush or something. And the war really intensifies things for them. So the other thing that I think she does brilliantly is she shows the different perspectives of war through the characters, through the two main characters for sure, but also through other supporting characters. There are some that are, ready to fight no matter what. This is what, they're here for kind of thing. And then there's others who are very anti-war. And then you have everything in between. And it really shows the many complexities of war. And something that was surprising for me in this was the use of letters. And there's articles and poetry. So both Henry and Sidney love poetry, so it is used throughout the novel. And it was also a reminder that, we can still appreciate literature and beauty even in times of war, and that those things can be helpful as well. So letters can sometimes be a hit or miss for me in books. In this one it worked, and I thought the use of the articles gave a real sense of the times. We are so far removed than we used to be from what it was like to give and receive information in the way that it was happening during the war, that the articles allowed us to kind of have a glimpse of what it might have been like to find out that a loved one had died. So I thought that this was really an amazing debut. I will definitely be reading more from Alice Winn when she publishes again, which is hopefully soon. I don't know. I should look that up. Okay, the final book on my list, which is probably in a box somewhere. It is my only 5-star read this time around, and it is The Knowing by Tanya Talaga. This was one of my most anticipated reads of 2025. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I really, I'm a huge fan of Tanya Talaga. I think the work she does is very important, and I think her writing is so important for truth and reconciliation work. So, in fact, I think that her first 2 books should be on everyone's reading list. Especially if you are interested in learning about Indigenous history and Indigenous peoples in Canada. The Knowing is another book I think that can be added to that list. This one, in many ways, is even more timely and more accessible. And so why do I say that? Tanya Talaga has written about residential schools before. But in this book, she does it through her own family and the search for her great-great-grandmother, Annie. So this also comes after the graves of children were found. Some of you may be very aware of this. So the first was the 215 graves in Kamloops, and many more have been found since then. And there's still more to be found. And Canada was kind of in this shocked mode, but really we shouldn't have been, because Indigenous people have been trying to tell us the truth for decades. That many of their friends, their classmates, their family members didn't come home, and nobody listened. So Tanya also writes about Pope Francis when he came to Canada in 2022 to apologize. And I had the opportunity to be part of a delegation, and I attended 3 events when he was here. It was part of the calls to action to have the Pope apologize on Canadian soil. But there were many different opinions and feelings and consequences of him coming here and doing that as well. So Tanya Talaga is a journalist, and what I admire most about her writing is she gives you the facts. It's very well researched, like a journalist, but she also has a way of humanizing her stories, which is sometimes lacking in other journalists' work. So it definitely comes through with the search for her great-great-grandmother. And in this book, she makes more of a I would say, connection between the facts and the human side of things. and how real people, including her own family and herself, are affected. So basically, why the facts matter. It was interesting to read a book which included, sorry, my dog wants attention. Interesting to read a book that included like people that I knew and, events that I had been to. And yet I was still able to learn and to see things in a new way. And I think that this book especially, that Tanya is able to link her two worlds, and she has let us in on that. So this would be an excellent book to read for June for National Indigenous History Month. I highly, highly recommend it. So with this book, or these three books, it leaves the TBR at 1,523. And that's where it sits for now until the next update of books hauled and read. So please let me know if you have read any of these books, or if you are interested in reading any of them, or any of them like already on your radar. Or maybe share what some of the best books that you have read recently that you would recommend to me or to others. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.